The old man sat quietly in the witness chair, hands folded, eyes forward. On his chest, a simple blue ribbon with white stars. Most people didn't recognize it. Judge Morrison certainly didn't. He just saw an old veteran trying to play hero. "Sir, this is a courtroom, not a parade. Remove that decoration." The request sent shockwaves through the gallery. Because you don't ask a Medal of Honor recipient to remove their medal, ever. Welcome to People's Journal Stories. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. William Bill Harrison walked into the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon, on a gray Tuesday morning in March. At 74, he moved slowly but with purpose, his weathered hands gripping a worn manila folder containing documents he'd hoped never to need again. He wore his only good suit, navy blue, purchased in 1987 for his retirement ceremony. On his left chest, pinned with careful precision, was a blue silk ribbon adorned with 13 white stars arranged in the shape of Betsy Ross's flag. To most passers-by, it looked like any other military decoration. It wasn't. Bill was one of only 3,500 living recipients of the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration for valor in combat. He'd received it for actions during the Vietnam War that he'd never talked about, not even to his late wife Margaret. Today, he wasn't here about his service. He was here as a witness in a civil case involving veteran healthcare benefits, specifically the denial of coverage for experimental PTSD treatments. The plaintiff's attorney had asked him to testify about the long-term effects of combat trauma. Bill had reluctantly agreed, not because he wanted attention, but because younger veterans needed better care than he'd received. As he entered courtroom 4B, Bill noticed the gallery was mostly empty. A few lawyers shuffled papers, court staff prepared for the day's proceedings. In the back row, a man in an expensive suit sat reading documents, probably another attorney. Bill took his seat on the witness bench when called. Judge Patricia Morrison, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, known for running an efficient courtroom, looked up from her files. "Please state your name for the record," the bailiff instructed. "William Harrison," Bill replied quietly. Judge Morrison's eyes immediately fixed on the blue ribbon on his chest. She'd seen plenty of veterans in her courtroom over the years. Disability claims, criminal cases, civil disputes. Many wore military decorations, some legitimate, others questionable. To her, they were all just props designed to gain sympathy from juries. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the authority of 15 years on the bench. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine. Bill stared at the judge, not comprehending. "Ma'am, the medal on your chest. This is a court of law, not a military ceremony. We don't allow displays designed to influence testimony." Bill's face remained neutral, but his hands tightened slightly in his lap. "Your Honor, this isn't for show. It's standard military dress protocol to wear decorations with formal attire." Judge Morrison's expression hardened. She dealt with attention-seeking veterans before, men who wore fake medals to court, hoping to gain sympathy or credibility with juries. "Mr. Harrison, I don't care what protocols you followed in the military. In my courtroom, we focus on facts, not costume jewelry. Remove it now or you'll be held in contempt." The words hit the gallery like a physical blow. Attorneys stopped shuffling papers. Court staff looked uncomfortable. In the back row, the man in the expensive suit slowly raised his head from his documents, because what Judge Morrison had just called costume jewelry was the Medal of Honor, a decoration that could only be earned through acts of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. And you don't ask someone to remove it, ever. Bill Harrison had faced enemy fire in Vietnam. He'd carried wounded Marines through minefields under artillery bombardment. He'd endured 3 tours in combat zones and 30 years of nightmares afterward, but sitting in that courtroom, being told his Medal of Honor was costume jewelry, might have been the most humiliating moment of his life. "Your Honor," the plaintiff's attorney, David Chen, stood up cautiously. "Perhaps we could sit down, counselor," Judge Morrison snapped. "Mr. Harrison, I'm waiting." Bill's hands moved slowly toward the ribbon on his chest. In all his years as a veteran, through protests and indifference, through bureaucratic battles and public apathy, no one had ever asked him to remove his Medal of Honor. The blue silk felt fragile between his fingers, though it represented the strongest part of who he was. In the gallery, the man in the expensive suit was now sitting forward, his attention completely focused on the scene unfolding before him. His face showed growing recognition and disbelief. "Your Honor," Bill said quietly, This medal represents the sacrifice of men who didn't come home. I'd prefer not to. Mr. Harrison, I've been patient enough. Remove that decoration immediately, or be held in contempt of court. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Bill had never been held in contempt of anything in his life. He'd served his country with distinction, raised 2 children as a single father after Margaret's death, volunteered at the VA hospital for 20 years, and now a federal judge was threatening to jail him for wearing the nation's highest military honor. As Bill's fingers began to unpin the medal, something extraordinary happened. The man in the back row stood up. "Your Honor, I request permission to address the court." The voice carried across the courtroom with unmistakable authority. Every head turned toward the back row, where the man now stood at attention. Judge Morrison looked up, irritated by the interruption. "Sir, this is not an open forum. Please sit down." "Your Honor, I am Lieutenant General Michael Hoffman, United States Marine Corps. I am requesting permission to address this court regarding the witness." The courtroom atmosphere shifted immediately. A 3-star general didn't just happen to be sitting in random court proceedings. Judge Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. "General, while I respect your rank, this is a civilian court. Unless you have legal standing in this case. I have moral standing, Your Honor, and I believe this court is about to make a serious error." General Hoffman stepped forward from the gallery, his movement precise and measured. He wore no uniform, but his bearing left no doubt about his military background. Judge Morrison found herself in unfamiliar territory. Federal judges didn't typically have 3-star generals interrupting their proceedings. "Your Honor," General Hoffman continued, "the decoration you've ordered Mr. Harrison to remove is the Medal of Honor. It is not costume jewelry. It is not a prop. It is the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government, and it can only be earned through acts of extraordinary valor in combat." Bill Harrison looked up at the general with surprise and gratitude. He'd never seen this man before in his life. Furthermore, General Hoffman said, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, asking a Medal of Honor recipient to remove his medal is not just inappropriate, it's unconscionable. Judge Morrison felt heat rising in her cheeks. The courtroom was dead silent, every person present hanging on General Hoffman's words. "General," she said, trying to regain control, "I appreciate your intervention, but I don't see how this changes. Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Without waiting for permission, General Hoffman walked forward. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a single sheet of paper. "This is Mr. Harrison's Medal of Honor citation. I took the liberty of printing it before court today." Judge Morrison accepted the paper with trembling hands. As she read, the color drained from her face. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, she read silently. Gunnery Sergeant William Harrison distinguished himself while serving as squad leader with Company M, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division, in connection with combat operations against the enemy in the Republic of Vietnam on 15 April 1969. The citation continued for several paragraphs, detailing how Bill had single-handedly held off an enemy assault, saved 12 wounded Marines, and refused evacuation until all his men were safe. Judge Morrison's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading. "Your Honor," General Hoffman said quietly, "Gunnery Sergeant Harrison saved 12 Marines that day. 3 of those Marines went on to become general officers. 1 became a Medal of Honor recipient himself. Another founded a non-profit that has helped thousands of homeless veterans." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Those 12 men have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Thousands of Americans are alive today because of what this man did in Vietnam. And you just called his Medal of Honor costume jewelry." Judge Morrison set the citation down with careful precision. In 15 years on the bench, she'd never felt smaller. The courtroom remained absolutely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology." Bill looked up at her with tired eyes. "Your Honor, I didn't come here for apologies. I came to help other veterans get the care they need." The simple dignity of his response made Judge Morrison's shame even deeper. "General Hoffman," she said, turning to the Marine officer, why are you here today?" "Your Honor, I make it my business to know when Medal of Honor recipients are testifying in federal court. Mr. Harrison's service record speaks for itself. I came to ensure he was treated with appropriate respect." Judge Morrison realized that her handling of this situation would likely be reviewed by every military officer in the Pacific Northwest, possibly the entire country. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "please keep your medal where it belongs. This court extends its full respect for your service and sacrifice." But the damage was done. Word would spread. A federal judge had disrespected a Medal of Honor recipient, and a 3-star general had been forced to intervene. Judge Morrison's career would never recover. With the crisis averted, proceedings continued. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Everyone in the courtroom now understood. They were in the presence of extraordinary courage. Bill's testimony was simple and direct. He spoke about Vietnam, about the decades of untreated PTSD that followed, about watching fellow veterans struggle with invisible wounds that the system often ignored. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I didn't talk about what happened in Vietnam for 40 years. The nightmares, the guilt, the isolation. I thought that was just the price of coming home. But younger veterans shouldn't have to suffer in silence like we did." His words carried weight that no legal argument could match. This wasn't theory or policy. This was lived experience from someone who'd paid the ultimate price for the right to speak. Judge Morrison found herself hanging on every word. The man she'd nearly held in contempt was teaching her more about sacrifice and service than 40 years of legal education. "Mr. Harrison," the plaintiff's attorney asked, "what would you say to those who argue that experimental PTSD treatments are too expensive?" Bill was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Judge Morrison. "Your Honor, freedom isn't free. We all know that saying. But neither is the peace that follows war. If we're not willing to pay for healing the men and women who protected that freedom, then what was the point of their sacrifice?" After court adjourned, General Hoffman approached Bill in the hallway. "Gunny," he said, using Bill's old Marine rank, "that was well done in there. General, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been there, I was there because men like you deserve respect. Always." General Hoffman paused, then continued. "Gunny, there's something you should know. I wasn't in Portland by accident. When I heard you were testifying, I rearranged my schedule to be here." "Why would you do that, sir?" "Because one of those Marines you saved in Vietnam was my father." Bill's eyes widened. "Your father?" "Captain James Hoffman. You carried him 3 kilometers to the LZ with a bullet in your leg. He used to tell me that story when I was growing up. Said he owed his life to the bravest Marine he ever served with." Bill felt tears forming. "How is he?" "He passed 2 years ago, Gunny. But he lived to see his grandchildren graduate college, lived to walk his daughter down the aisle. All because of you." That evening, Judge Morrison sat in her chambers long after the courthouse had emptied. The Medal of Honor citation lay on her desk, alongside printouts of news articles about Bill Harrison she'd found online. The articles painted a picture of quiet heroism, extending far beyond that day in Vietnam. After returning from war, Bill had worked as a machinist for 30 years while raising 2 children alone. He'd volunteered at the VA hospital, coached Little League, mentored at-risk youth. He'd never sought publicity for his Medal of Honor. In fact, most articles mentioned how difficult it was to get him to talk about his service at all. Judge Morrison realized she'd nearly destroyed the reputation of a man who embodied everything America claimed to value, and she'd done it out of ignorance and prejudice. Her phone rang. It was her clerk. "Judge Morrison, the story is already online. Federal judge orders Medal of Honor recipient to remove medal. It's trending on social media." Judge Morrison closed her eyes. Her judicial career was effectively over. Within 48 hours, the video of Judge Morrison's exchange with Bill Harrison had been viewed millions of times. Military advocacy groups called for her resignation. Congressional representatives issued statements condemning her actions. But the most damaging criticism came from an unexpected source: General Hoffman's official statement. "Federal judges are entrusted with upholding the law and treating all citizens with dignity. Yesterday, Judge Morrison failed both obligations. Her treatment of Gunnery Sergeant Harrison was not just inappropriate, it was a disgrace to every principle our judicial system claims to represent." Judge Morrison submitted her resignation 3 days later. Bill Harrison, meanwhile, returned to his quiet life in Portland. He'd never wanted to be the center of controversy, but his testimony had achieved its goal. The court ruled in favor of expanded PTSD treatment coverage for veterans. 6 months later, General Hoffman visited Bill at his small house in southeast Portland. They sat on the back porch drinking coffee and watching the rain. "Gunny, you know what the most important thing about that day was?" General Hoffman asked. "What's that, sir?" "You never lost your dignity. Even when she was humiliating you, you stayed respectful. That says more about your character than any medal could." Bill sipped his coffee. "My father always told me that respect is earned through actions, not decorations. The medal represents what I did one day in 1969, but character is what you do every day after that." General Hoffman nodded. "That's why those 12 Marines lived, Gunny. Not just because you were brave for one day, but because you were the kind of man who would never leave anyone behind." A year later, the federal courthouse in Portland installed a small plaque in the lobby. "In honor of all veterans who have served with distinction and sacrifice, may their service never be forgotten, and may their dignity always be respected." It was funded by donations from courthouse staff who had witnessed Judge Morrison's treatment of Bill Harrison. Bill never knew about the plaque. He would have been embarrassed by the attention. But General Hoffman made sure that every new federal judge in the district received mandatory training on military decorations and veteran respect. What happened to Bill Harrison would never happen again in that courthouse. The most important outcome wasn't Judge Morrison's resignation or the media attention. It was the expanded PTSD treatment program that Bill's testimony had helped secure. Within 2 years, the program had helped over 3,000 veterans access cutting-edge trauma therapy. Suicide rates among program participants dropped by 40%. Employment rates increased by 60%. 3 Marines who received treatment through the program wrote letters to Bill, thanking him for his courage in testifying. One letter read, "Gunny, I never served with you in Vietnam, but you saved my life anyway. Thank you for not staying silent when it mattered." That letter meant more to Bill than any medal ever could. At 76, Bill Harrison continues his quiet service. He volunteers at the Portland VA Medical Center 3 days a week, helping veterans navigate the benefits system. He speaks occasionally at high schools about military service, though he still refuses most interview requests. When young people ask about his Medal of Honor, he always redirects the conversation to the Marines who didn't come home. "I was just doing my job," he tells them. The real heroes are the ones whose names are on the wall. William Harrison never wanted to be famous. He never sought attention for his service. All he wanted was for other veterans to get the care they deserved. But sometimes, standing up for what's right means accepting unwanted spotlight. Sometimes, dignity in the face of disrespect becomes its own form of heroism. Judge Morrison learned too late that respect isn't something you can command from a bench. It's something you earn through your actions and lose through your failures. Bill Harrison earned his respect long before he ever entered that courtroom, and he'll keep earning it every day he continues to serve his fellow veterans. The Medal of Honor on his chest isn't just about what he did in Vietnam. It's about who he is as a person. Then, now, and always. Because some people don't just wear their medals, they live them. Thank you for watching People's Journal Stories. If you know a veteran whose service and sacrifice deserves recognition, share their story in the comments. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. We share stories that remind us to honor those who served every week.